Call this meeting to order. Before we get to, we have a few items to go over before we get to our workshop today. But before we get to these, let's go ahead and rise if you are willing and able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk.
Approve the minutes of the regular meeting on March 16th, 2021.
Every member had a chance to review the minutes, and if so, is there any discussion? If there's no discussion of the minutes, then I will go ahead and make a motion to accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by Vice Mayor Johnson. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the vote. With the result of 6 yeas to 0 nays, that motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Oath of office, City Council Member for District 3.
Oath of office, City Council Member for District 3. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Judge Jones. Family can come down and join council member appointed.
Raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Jared Cirillo,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and the Constitution of the State of Kansas,
and faithfully discharge the duties
and faithfully discharge the duties
of District 3 City Council Member
of District 3 City Council Member
for the City of Wichita, Kansas.
for the City of Wichita, Kansas.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations and welcome, council member.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Consent agenda items 1 through 13.
Has every member had a chance to review the consent agenda? Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, sir. I would like to pull item number 5. I have a couple of questions.
Item number 5 will be pulled and placed into the as the following item. Councilmember Bluebog.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pull item number 6 and ask a couple of questions.
Item 6 will also be pulled and placed under item 5 in the following this item. Is there any other discussion or questions on the consent agenda as presented? If there is none, then I will make a motion that we pass the consent agenda items 1 through 13 with the exceptions of item 5 and item 6. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. With the result of 7 yeas to 0 nays, the motion does pass. On to item 5. The chair recognizes Councilmember Fry.
Thank you. Chief Snow, if you don't mind.
Chief Snow, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and council members.
Thank you. So I understand item 5 is a safer grant request for additional firefighters to outfit a truck.
That's correct.
The green sheet references that we have a safer grant from 2017 that funded 12 firefighters. So is that one complete, and are these 12 positions, are those 12 positions still being on that SAFER grant?
The grant completes, it terminates on February 24th of 2022.
2022? Okay.
Yes.
So then this SAFER grant would be a net new 12 positions?
That's correct.
Okay, good. The green sheet also references that a lack of truck companies is cited for increased response times in southwest portion of the city. So, and it also lists that truck 4 at Station 16 in my district, District 5, is responding to many structure fires in southwest Wichita. So where will this new truck and crew be located? Do we determine that yet?
Yes. We're going to put it south of Broadway, and what we're looking at currently is either Station 12, which is located by the South YMCA, the R Meridian, or Station 22, which sits at Hydraulic and Dinker. Both of those have access to 235. It's our hopes to use our predictive analytics, which we're in the final stages of purchasing. And once we get that purchased, we anticipate within 60, 90 days to have that up and running to give us the data that we need to make a better informed decision. But right now, that's the 2 stations that we've identified.
Well, obviously, Station 12 is a little more further southwest, so that would, I think, help Station 16 and Station 17, which are both, I think, seeing increased responses. Do we have the truck and the equipment in place to staff these 12 positions?
Yes, we do. We have 3 units right now, 3 apparatus in reserve truck status.
Okay, so no additional expense there. If we're successful in securing this grant, how soon do we think we'll be operational?
Just as quickly as we can get the truck renumbered and radios put in. It should take us, in our current process, where we have a queue of firefighters that are ready to be hired. So I'd say within 60 days at the maximum.
Do we have an idea of when we could expect to hear on the grant?
That's a best guess. They used to always be very consistent, and we'd hear in the fall. But as you can tell with the timeline of the 2017 grant expiring in February of 2022, I'd just be guessing, sir.
Well, and I know this last year has seen quite the increase on demand for you and your staff, and I applaud you for the work that you've been doing. So being ahead of the game and trying to get this grant is certainly commendable. One last question. Nearly 2 years ago, retired Deputy Chief Brad Crisp went over to the county with the intent to lead and identify a consolidation feasibility review. Where are we with that?
We continue to work on it, but just pieces at a time. Currently, we still work on the training aspect of it. We ran into some hiccups with recruit class. Basically, just the amount of the numbers that we could actually host at the training grounds. That was one of the differences. And then just some basic techniques. So we continue to work on that. We're currently embracing the FIU, the Fire Investigation Unit, and some other aspects of the community risk reduction, public education aspect of it, and also inspections. So we're just little baby steps, continue to progress.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, 2 years seems like there should be enough time to maybe get an update on the status of that. I know I've talked to city manager about that, trying to get a better view of where we're at and how that is working. I think it might be time for an update.
Most definitely.
Mr. Mayor,
Manager.
Councilmember Fry, I just last week had a conversation with County Manager Stoltz, and we're going to get a status meeting together of the fire staff from both sides of the street, as well as with Brad Crisp, to summarize where they are. He has done a significant amount of work, and I think he has some preliminary thoughts and recommendations, but they haven't been shared with us, and that's going to be an opportunity for us to learn more.
Mayor, I have no more questions. I appreciate the chief standing and answering them, but I'd entertain a motion to, or I'd be happy to make a motion to approve this consent item.
We actually have another person who's jumped on
Okay.
the talk list. So with that, Councilmember Claycomb.
Thank you. I just have a question, make sure I understood this. This is net new 12 firefighters.
That's correct.
Okay. And when I know this isn't on this agenda item, but when the 2017 expires in 2022, we have the funding to incorporate those 12 into our operations?
That's gonna be my request at my budget hearing.
Okay.
So
All right, so
I
that's
can't
later.
answer that yet.
All right, thank you.
Further questions on this item? With that, I do just want to applaud what the fire department is doing. This, I believe, also comes with a truck, and I don't think we've talked about that yet. It's not just 12 firefighters, but it also will come with its own engine. Is that correct?
I didn't understand the last part of that, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry. I believe that this also is not just 12 firefighters if we were able to receive this grant, but it also comes with another engine. Is that correct?
Well, we'll take an apparatus out of reserve status and put it as a frontline machine, yes,
So I have another one on.
yes.
And also, just to kind of brag about really your department and its ability to find opportunities, a lot of times we have to match or pay for these grants as well. My understanding is this isn't one of those times that we actually will have these positions fully funded for the life of this grant.
That's correct.
I just want to applaud you for finding really resources in this tough COVID environment that are going to help out our city as a whole. So thank you for that. With that, this falls into District 5, so I don't know if it does actually. I'll just go ahead and give the floor back to Councilmember Fry, who
Thank you.
pulled this off the agenda. Go ahead.
So I make a motion that the city council authorize submission for the FY 2020 Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, also known as SAFER Grant, for 12 firefighter positions to staff a 6th truck company in South Wichita with 4 personnel per shift.
Second.
And it's been seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast their vote. Please vote of 7 yeas to 0 nays. The motion does pass. We are now on item 6 of the consent agenda, and I will go ahead and recognize Councilmember Bluebog.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Got a question on the vendor selection along with this for the apparatus. In our notes, it says the city conducted a public solicitation process seeking proposals from qualified manufacturers of vehicles meeting the specifications. Did we not do a published RFP? Did we just go out to a handful of people? Help me better understand the source selection process.
No, it's my understanding we did do an RFP, and that these were the top 2 vendors. I don't want to say top 2, but they were the 2 vendors that were selected from that RFP.
Okay, how did we do that? Did we publish it?
And the process of that, I don't know.
Here we go.
Good morning, Hannah Lang from Purchasing. Yes, we did publish that as a request for qualifications to select vendors so we could have this on contract as a blanket purchase order. This is a contract that we typically have on contract for the fire department to be able to use as a 5-year contract.
We say that last part again.
We typically have this on an annual contract basis for the fire department to use it as a 5-year contract. We get those prices locked in with our vendors. So it's one that we go out for RFP every 5 years to obtain vendors so they can make the selection and get those apparatuses.
To any qualified manufacturers or only
Correct.
a list that the city has?
No, we have, when we send out our solicitations, we have commodity codes that we have vendors register with. So we send it out to those manufacturers that have those commodity codes registered, and then any vendors that the department wants to add on to that solicitation.
I'd like to visit later about the process because I did have a manufacturer reach out to me, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Further discussion on item 6. If there's no further discussion, then I will make the motion to accept staff's recommended action to approve the subsequent use of the Wes and Conrad, the recommended vendors, and approve the use of the attached memoranda of agreements and structure for future purchases of wildland fighting apparatus through the Board of Bids. It's gonna be one of those mornings. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and is seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. Result is 7 yeas to 0 nays. That motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Report of Board of Bids and Contracts dated March 22nd, 2021.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, City Council. Hannah Lane, Department of Finance for the Board of Bids March 22nd recommendations. First engineering bid we have is trail improvements to Pawnee Prairie Park Phase 2, Gray and Sons Construction for the base bid and add alternate 1 for a total of $90,000. O.J. Watson Park Event Center, Conco Incorporated for the base bid and add alternate 4 for a total of $1,223,055. Water Distribution System Tide Project with Auburn Lakes Addition Phase 3, Apex Excavating for the base bid of water distribution with an add alternate 1 and the base bid of the sanitary sewer for an aggregate bid total of $168,673.50. OP3 Joint and Crack Seal Phase 4, PPJ Construction, $203,750. Derby Court Neighborhood Water Main Replacement Phase 2, Wilkes Underground Utilities, $176,365. Asphalt Hot and Cold Mix, defer to April 5th Board of Bids. $58,000 GVWR Dump Truck, defer to April 5th. Trailer Mounted Hydraulic Submersibles Pump, defer to April 5th. 5x9, 18, and 24 riprap, H Excavating LLC for $134,140. Batteries, Automotive and Commercial, 4J A&DM LLC for $65,575.22. Four-wheel drive rubber tire tractor loader and backhoe, Foley equipment for the base bid with options 3, 4, 6, and 7 for a total of $124,768. This is our purchasing procurement website, as well as the current open request for proposals that we have. That is the Board of Bid recommendations. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
Are there questions of staff? Discussion on the topic from the bench? Anyone who would like to speak from the public? See none. With that, I will make the motion to accept staff's recommended action to receive and file the report, approve the contracts, and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the votes. Result of 7 yeas to 0 nays. That motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Petition for public improvement.
Welcome, sir.
Good morning, Mayor and Council members. Gary Jansen, Public Works Engineering. The item before you this morning is the approval of petitions for public improvements. The signatures on the petitions represent 100% of the improvement district, and all petitions are valid per Kansas statute. We have one revised petition today. In December of 2020, the City Council approved petitions for water, sewer, and paving improvements to serve Marinita Second Edition, which is in District 2. The developer has submitted a revised benefit district for the stormwater only. The budget remains the same. Staff recommends that the City Council approve the revised petition, adopt the amending resolution, authorize necessary signature, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Questions for staff? The discussion. Discussion from the bench or from the public? See none. With that, I'll make the motion to take staff's recommended action to approve the revised petition, adopt the amending resolution, and authorize the necessary signatures. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded by the Vice Mayor. Clerk will open a roll. Members cast the votes. Result of 7 yeas to 0 nays. That motion does pass. Madam Clerk.
Council member appointments and comments.
Begin with appointments. Is there any appointments that would like to be made this time, so we can do them all at once? With that, Councilmember Tuttle.
Thank you. I will be reappointing 10 of my 11 district advisory board members. One I just appointed a couple months ago, and I have sent these names to the clerk for the record. So I would like to reappoint Chris Broderick, Dee Neiswanger, Alicia Sanchez, Faith Martin, Nancy Lossell, Tyler York, Stephen Labida, Sam Lindeman, Tracy Adams, and Nazir Jasri. Thank you.
Councilmember Blubow.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to reappoint my DAB 4, Grant Delmar, Dalton Glasscock, Michael Gom, June Johnson, Matt Lashley, Jonathan McRoy, Alex Martinez, Laura Rainwater, Rebecca Robertson, and new appointment Wally Bell. And I'd like to reappoint Cheryl Batt to the CSBG Review Committee.
Are there any other appointments by any members? Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. No appointment, but I will be abstaining from this vote. One of the District Advisory Board members that is being reappointed is my campaign treasurer.
Noted. Other comments on these? If not, I will make a motion to accept the appointments, and we'll be looking for someone else to second.
Second?
Motion has been made and seconded by Councilmember Fry. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast their vote. Result of 6 yeas to 1 abstain. The motion does pass. The members are appointed. Back on general discussion or announcements. Are there any announcements or discussion for the good of the group? Councilmember Tuttle.
I just wanted to clarify, and I might have caught it wrong, but I think in the last vote that Councilmember Fry made the second, but it said Bluebaugh made the, so I just wanted to make sure for the record we get that cleaned up. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just want to congratulate Councilmember Cerullo, representing District 3. Congratulations today, and looking forward to serving with you.
Thank you.
Other announcements for the group? See none. With that, I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Which has been made and seconded. Clerk will open the roll. Members cast the vote. The result of 7 yeas to 0 nays. We are officially adjourned from the meeting, and we will now begin our City Council workshop on a topic of places for people, implementation, and incentives. Chair recognizes our City Manager, Manager Layton.
Mayor, thank you. This is our second workshop on the implementation of the Places for People. Previously, we discussed land bank and we talked about zoning. We have now been going through a pretty robust engagement process on those two elements since you saw it last. Scott Wadle, our planning director, is going to do an introduction on this third element, incentives, and our analysis that's been completed regarding incentive recommendations. And then he'll also, at the very end of the presentation, bring you up to speed of where we are with the land bank and zoning issues. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Great, thank you.
Welcome,
Good morning,
sir.
everyone. Scott Wadle from the Planning Department. The Civic Initiative, Places for People, recommends a number of implementation actions. Community conversations are going on, and we are collecting feedback on 2 of those, the land bank and the zoning updates. And as the city manager indicated, I can provide a brief update on those at the end of today's workshop. Today we're here to begin a conversation about strategic investments in revitalizing neighborhoods. Here to present is Andy Feaster with Development Strategies. They do work across the country on economic strategies and planning, and they're working with multiple peer cities to Wichita. However, Andy is a resident of Wichita, and he's very proud to call Wichita home. And today he's going to present on options to revitalize Wichita neighborhoods and help make Wichita even more fiscally resilient. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Mayor and council members. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about this important topic and also get out of my basement office. And so just a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. I want to start by discussing why infill development is important. I'm going to walk through the different phases of the incentives analysis we worked with Scott and also economic development on, and then move through discussion. I'm going to pause at the end of each section for reflection and discussion, because this is for information, this is for discussion, and I have a lot of information in here. And so a brief overview of development strategies. We're a holistic planning practice, and the company name really reflects what we do. We're experts in real estate, community, and economic development, but also thinking about how that intersects with how we design our cities and places. As Scott mentioned, we do work across the country. We were part of the consulting team for Places for People but we were also more recently working on housing strategies in Omaha, Tulsa, and Topeka, a lot of neighborhood plans, and broader plans like comprehensive and strategic plans for cities. And we're actually working with some of these communities on implementing the plans, including Tulsa and Omaha and their affordable housing efforts. And I want to begin by talking about why infill development is important. A focus on infill development and redevelopment creates a more vibrant and equitable community. And I want to talk about that in the context of kind of 4 different efforts, although there's a lot more we could talk about. You know, this is about implementing recent planning efforts where there was a lot of community engagement and thought about where the community wants the city to go. It's about creating economically and vibrant places, and it's also about, when we're talking about infill redevelopment, addressing policies that led to a lot of disinvestment. And I have some maps here to illustrate kind of the impacts of past decisions on today's environment. When we talk about reflecting the visions and desires of the community, you know, the places where people plan, it was pretty clear that the community we engaged through the process wants strong neighborhood and vibrant centers. They want reinvestment in core neighborhoods and diverse housing options. And I know you all are working with this, and the city's working on this through the zoning and land bank conversations, through this discussion, which will continue, and through thinking about where to start, where to target redevelopment efforts. In terms of creating economically and fiscally vibrant places, focus on infill and reinvesting in our core is about equitable, easy to say this morning, equitable development and policies that benefit all Wichitans, taking advantage of existing infrastructure and services, neighborhoods where we already have investments, where we already have police and fire protection, reconnecting core neighborhoods to those services, to job centers, and creating better opportunity for residents. We're talking about improving neighborhood and housing conditions incrementally over time and creating new opportunities for community members to pursue their visions and goals through entrepreneurship. And I want to provide an example about the potential fiscal and economic impact of an infill effort. I selected at random a couple blocks here at 15th and Grove in Northeast Wichita, where there's 10 vacant lots. The current appraised value of these 2 blocks, the 43 parcels, is about $770,000, which is $18,000 per parcel. If these 10 lots are infilled with a new single-family home with an estimated market value of about $75,000, which is relatively low, but reflective of the current condition there, the impact would be to double the appraised value, county appraised value, in those 2 blocks, just by filling in 20% of those lots. So, incrementally over time, the investment would yield great results in terms of city revenues, but also, as we've seen in Habitat's efforts and Rock the Block, and incrementally over time improve the neighborhood, build trust with residents, and you start to see that reinvestment emerge from longtime homeowners who see kind of the trajectory of the blocks improve. And that, has broad impacts on city budget over time. We know that property taxes are 20% of revenues, so improving that trajectory and that environment will create more fiscal sustainability in the long term. The final area I want to address in terms of why infill development is important is to look back at policies this is from 1937. This is the original, we call it now the redlining map that was done in Wichita. Redlining was a process that pretty much graded neighborhoods by the investment risk. Where these classifications defined where people could get loans to buy homes, invest in their homes, and conduct business. And this is a quote from Mapping Inequality, which tracks the redlining and provides these maps Redlining is a key factor in racial disparities in wealth and opportunity that continue to the present day. And if you think about why we see some of the disinvestment and challenging conditions in so many of Wichita's neighborhoods, north and south, that were built before 1940, it does tie back to this map because people were not able to invest in the places they lived. And one element of this map that is staggering to me and the other areas we work is the percentage of the neighborhoods that are rated as yellow or red, which is definitely declining or hazardous. It's 77% of the city. In Tulsa, in Omaha, in Topeka, and other areas we work, in St. Louis, where we're headquartered, the red area is 45%. So this was a staggering setup to, not set up, but what was defined at this time has ripple effects to what we see today. And so I have a few examples of what I mean. These are some maps from an opportunity zones presentation I did a couple of years ago. The dotted lines are opportunity zones, and I brought these in as examples, and you can kind of ignore the dotted lines. I wanted to focus on the core area that is redlined. We can see, with a few exceptions of downtown and Cargill and Wesley and Via Christi, not a lot of permit activity occurred in the core area and the redlined areas. When we talked about median household income, the lowest incomes are concentrated in the areas that were redlined. The shares of household in poverty in our core areas and the neighborhoods that were redlined. And one of the most perhaps staggering maps to me is the life expectancy. Based on where we live in the city, it's a lot lower in our redline neighborhoods where investment was hard over the last 80 years because of conditions, because of access to good food, because of health challenges and all of that. And so the last point on this topic of why infill development is important, I wanted to focus on housing, because housing will be kind of the backbone to any infill and redevelopment strategy that impacts our neighborhoods in a positive way. We know from our work and a body of research nationally, quality affordable housing supports health. Emergency visits for asthma go down 60% when kids have stable quality homes. People's mental health is better. People's physical health is better. Access to quality food is better. Secure housing strengthens education, and this is educational attainment for children and graduation rates, but it also helps schools perform better because kids aren't moving as much when they have quality homes and dedicated affordable housing. It improves financial security for families. Families who have access to stable, affordable housing are able to start shifting resources to savings, to better food, to other investments in themselves and their family. And housing development, as we know, is a really big economic development driver. Not just construction, but the annual operations of housing is like a major employer or two in our city. So it impacts our neighbors, and it impacts our city in major ways. And are there any kind of thoughts or questions before we continue?
Back when we were looking at the slide there as to the impact of the 5 or 6 houses and the property tax increase that could potentially be there, what are your thoughts on the other houses in the neighborhood as well? Obviously I would think that, going from a vacant lot to a new structure of some sort, it's looking for encouragement for the rest of the neighborhood to kind of follow that trend. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, that is what we see kind of in neighborhoods where there is this gradual infill reinvestment, is that over time, people do start to reinvest in their homes because they see it happening. I think we've seen it a lot, starting with Habitat's efforts in Rock the Block, but that's not the only. I just think that's an example. It's also an example that they've been working there 5 to 7 years, and it takes that much time to start working with neighbors, providing some resources, aligning some, renovation projects for it to catch on, because there is an element of building trust and seeing that this is a commitment. But yes, long-term, over time, we do see a trend toward people reinvesting. I mean, these are areas where property values are very low, so putting money into a home is really a tough decision, because you're not going to get it back, where in more stable neighborhoods, you're more likely to.
Yeah, I would also add, we've seen that in the Rock the Block area. Habitat over the last few years, Ann might get upset, but I think there are 53 houses now that they've built. So hundreds of young people and new folks in the community, and some of those houses that we wanted to see investment in and improvement and siding and all of that, we're seeing that start. And Habitat's also been connecting folks to resources as well to help out, so that's been good. Comment-wise, I appreciate you bringing up redlining. We don't talk about redlining enough. We don't talk about its impact generationally and what it's doing to us currently. And two quotes I really like to connect to that, and they're both true from what I've seen. One is that it's government-sanctioned discrimination that happened in the 30s. Programs, investment, all of that was not allowed to go into these areas, which were primarily poor folk or people of color. And that still is impacting folks today. The other is Dr. Waters from Texas, when he was here at Wichita State a few years ago, said that historically redline areas today are either the most gentrified parts of our city or still poor, and that's true around the country. I immediately started to look to see if that was true in Wichita, and when you look at our history of where the black community was downtown and how they moved into North Wichita, and downtown is now government center, it is gentrified. And Northeast Wichita and South Wichita and these other areas are still poor. So those two things are true, and this effort could help change that. So I appreciate you bringing that to the forefront and highlighting it for all to see.
Thank you. All right, so all of this really begs the question, how do we begin to address these challenges? And that gets to the crux of what we've been working on with the city. The first step is, some things to keep in mind when we talk about incentives and thinking through a strategic approach to infill development. There's no silver bullets. This is complex. This is challenging. Neighborhood reinvestment, and we talked about this in the Places for People plan. In our most challenged neighborhoods, it's a long-term commitment, and we really have to align a lot of resources, not just city services, but social services, community development approaches to see lasting results. We need to acknowledge that the city cannot solve all of the development challenges. It's critical that the city's clear about what's offering, what the processes are, and that there is a commitment to this activity, but a lot of partners need to come to the table, including developers and philanthropy and nonprofits and others. And layering programs and strategies, we're trying to leverage resources as much as possible to accomplish this work. So the first thing we did in this process was look at current and potential programs. And I'm not going to read this list. I'm happy to come back to it. But we looked at the programs in various ways. We looked at fee waivers because that was a topic of interest. We looked at city policies, and this includes zoning, application processes, how departments and programs work together, because that can really be an incentive in and of itself if things are clear and expedited. Grants and related programs, how entitlement funds are used, and other types of special programs that are underway or could be, and the tax-related programs like TIF and IRBs and other things. And then we looked at that list. We thought about what kind of fits in Wichita. What are some good precedents? And I want to highlight 5 different initiatives that are case studies that I think are promising here if they make sense. The first one is the Neighborhood Revitalization Program in Topeka. And it's a different take on what used to be in place here in Wichita. They formed it in 1995 to promote revitalization. They provide 2 tiers based on the neighborhood health maps, which are similar to the neighborhood cycle maps that we had in the Places for People plan. You know, the most challenged areas, the priority areas for reinvestment have a 95% tax rebate over 10 years. The next tier up has a 95% rebate for 5 years, then it reduces to 50%. And I talked to the folk in Topeka about how this has gone. Has it met expectations? Is it accomplishing the goals? A few key messages are, you know, it's a simple application process. Aside from special cases, it's administrative, so it's quick and simple. They review the policy, they have to reauthorize it every 3 years, and they update the maps that the investment target areas are focused on every 3 years. And the neighborhood maps themselves create a built-in but-for test where we know the areas where the incentive, the tax rebate is a possibility are areas where we know there's a development gap, where it costs more to do redevelopment than the current market value. The impact of the program has been very impressive. In the 23 years represented here, $425 million in reinvestment was supported through the program, almost 600 projects. They leverage the rebate dollars at a ratio of 10 to 1. $10 invested for every dollar of tax rebate. And they've generated $20 million in net new property taxes from these projects. The key challenge that they've seen is small rehabs. So those smaller projects that would occur next door to the new homes are harder to support through this program because the increment is so small. But there's some other ways to address that. And they don't include fee waivers in this, which was a big difference from the former program here. The second policy and program I want to highlight, you know, if you want to focus on a specific land use or a specific kind of element, Tulsa has a retail incentive policy to help reinvest and reinvigorate struggling retail centers in core neighborhoods. They reimburse, it's reimbursement, but it includes a lot of different costs, not just improving the site, the facility. It's also, you know, professional services like what Wichita State provides through their entrepreneurship center. They align pretty much all the economic development tools in the process as well, and it's funded each year as part of the general fund. They've had mixed results. It began in 2013, but they retooled it a year ago because they weren't seeing it used the way they wanted, which is to reinvest in these challenged core centers. They do have a project underway that's closing soon for renovation and re-tenanting, and their intent, as they've adjusted, is to proactively identify properties throughout the city and work with the owners to try to stimulate the reinvestment. A key challenge is it's a rebate, so you get paid back over time as sales taxes increase from those centers. Property owners still have to have the capital up front. And a key element in Tulsa that would be helpful here in the long term is they have a partnership with the local CDFI that aligns a lot of resources for small businesses and you know, minority entrepreneurship and this kind of work through Tulsa Economic Development Coordination. So they're able to kind of package everything in one place. Third policy, and this focuses on permit and utility waivers. And you know, Austin, Texas is a much different context, I acknowledge that. But this is a kind of an award-winning policy that they started in 2000 to stimulate the production of affordable housing. They can align waiving, they have more permit fees, more fees than we do, but they can layer those to support specific projects in rapidly developing areas. And they also do an expedited review process. It's supported thousands of affordable units. It's cut permitting time by 40%, which really helps this kind of development proceed and keep the resources used at a maximum. And they have a great success rate in working through some of the community challenges we face when we add density or do new development. In terms of kind of a neighborhood focus, Oklahoma City has an initiative called Strong Neighborhoods Initiative. And this began also in 2013, where they wanted to focus resources over several years in specific neighborhoods. And they started with 3 neighborhoods with the intent of improving quality of life, increasing engagement in the neighborhoods, increasing private investment, better connect people to jobs, and kind of have this more holistic approach. It is a slow burn, but it is showing promising results. They've leveraged, $1.50 to $3 in non-city dollars per city dollar invested. Almost $20 million in investments in the 3 pilot neighborhoods, and they're doing 3 more neighborhoods now. And there's been a lot of almost 60 home renovations, 20 new affordable homes, and a key point going back to that infill side is property taxes or property values increased steadily over time. It wasn't rapid increases, but just gradually and incrementally. And the final case study is more on the policy side of how do we make this more straightforward for our community, our developers, our CDCs, and nonprofits to do this work. In Cincinnati, they have all their incentive information in one place. They have it on a website that's easy to navigate. It has a couple of different purposes. One is accountability. You can see which projects get incentives. You can see their status. You can see how it's being utilized. But you can also, if you're interested in this work, you can find the information and who to contact very, very quickly and easily. So those are 5 kind of programs and initiatives that have supported infill in different ways in kind of some of our peer and aspirational cities. Are there any kind of thoughts or questions on those?
I have a question. And this is kind of getting down in the weeds, but on the Tulsa example case study, you talked about an Economic Development Corporation, a CDFI. What do those do? I don't think we have one in Wichita, do we?
Correct. Trying to think of the short version. A CDFI is a community-based financial development institution. It's in many ways a non-traditional lender. So they're able to take, in banking it would be risk that the traditional lending doesn't do. They might do second mortgages program for home buyers. They might work with those small business entrepreneurs who don't have the credit or don't have, the net worth to get traditional loans. And so it's kind of that community development focus. And they're typically funded sometimes through like CDBG related dollars, entitlement dollars, but also they can get CRA monies from banks, philanthropy, and so forth.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, if that's okay. And this is actually the slide right before the case study, and I'm sorry to send you back a few.
No
It's
problem.
the really tiny one, because I have old eyes. It talks about what Wichita has and what Wichita doesn't have.
The table.
Yeah, the table, thank you. I'm curious, and maybe this is a question for staff, but, I'm excited to see what we have, but then my first thought was, okay, Wichita doesn't have, is there some sort of prioritization, or in the plan where we're trying to address these? Like, what we don't have, what do we need to make this more successful, and how are we gonna get there? And maybe Bob can answer it. I'm looking this way, and I should be looking this way, I'm sorry.
Andy's gonna get there.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead just a bit, sorry.
No problem.
But I'm excited, Andy.
That's definitely the right question to ask.
So I had one question as well. In these case studies, some of the concern I've heard from folks in District 1 is around the notification, which would kind of, in the last workshop, seem to be taken out of that, so not letting the neighborhood know what was going on. In these other case studies, do they do the same thing, or do they still let neighborhoods know what type of projects are happening, whether it's just building a new home or not?
I'm not sure the specific of that specific answer, but
I think you're mixing a little bit of apples and oranges. The issues we had before are zoning, right? So once the zoning's established, we normally would not bring an actual housing project. If we receive a housing permit, we're not gonna take that out to the neighborhood before we issue the permit. So there would not be notification once the zoning has been locked in place. And what we proposed is also the adoption of design criteria, so that they would have influence in that regard as well.
So the processes in these case studies are not that same process that we're talking about?
And sir, I do want to let you know that we are looking into the notification process. We've got a couple memos that we're putting together in terms of how we do the notification, both through signs and mailings, and how other communities do that. And so it's one of the items that we're working on right now.
Okay.
And I would add that a key element of any of these approaches, particularly neighborhood infill, you know, we're talking about neighborhoods that I think a lot of residents feel ignored for a long time. And so there's a process of building trust that is difficult, but also critical. So there's an engagement aspect that we need to lead, like how these programs would work in the neighborhoods, and just having those discussions, which I know are underway, but it is a key element. I'll kind of refer back to the Rock the Block initiative. I know just from conversations with Ann that they went door to door and talked to people, and because when things happen to neighborhoods, people want to know what's going on, but also just know that it's not some of the negative things that have happened both recently and in the past. Any other questions on the case studies?
I just got a question in general. You know, we talk a lot about gentrification. All the markets going up. I mean, not just here in Wichita, everywhere across the country. Do we have any specific examples of neighborhoods here in Wichita where we think that, hey, you know, we're pricing the locals that have always lived here out of the market? And I'd be happy to hear from any of the council members that if you're seeing that in any of your neighborhoods.
So I can't provide any proof at this point, but that is a fear in the Fairmount community with all the development going on. The new student housing, some multi-use development. There's a fear that that neighborhood will soon price out the folks on fixed income and they won't be able to stay there. And that's something we're watching. It hasn't happened yet that I've seen, but that is a growing concern.
Jared, are you seeing any of that in District 3?
Not that I know of.
Or Mayor, I guess you.
So, very good topic. I think at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned about redlining, about how today those areas are either the most lower income areas or they are the most gentrified areas. In the case studies, what have other cities done to ensure that they don't become, that these neighborhoods expand more opportunities for folks who are there, opposed to being, I guess, followed as a statistic of gentrification?
That's a great question. No place has solved the challenge. There's two ways we've seen kind of, I would say, promising results. One is ensuring that there's quality affordable housing built as part of any redevelopment plan, whether it's new homes, whether it's helping keep people in their homes. et cetera. Second, and we've looked at this really closely for some of our recent work, is sometimes there's a fund that helps those households, particularly long-term residents who are on fixed incomes, with any property tax increase. It's in the greater scheme of philanthropy or what have you, it's a relatively small amount, but it keeps people in their homes if their property taxes double, for instance. And so those are two promising ways, but there definitely needs to be, sometimes a little bit more density does help, because you can add more units and you can have, strategically add those affordable units to keep people in their community. All right. Next up is, I talked to several developers, minority developers, nonprofit developers, and some others, and I focused on a bit on outside of downtown. I acknowledge downtown's important, but we've had a lot of focus there and a lot of momentum, so I wanted to kind of hear more about, at the neighborhood level, what are the challenges, what's going well, et cetera. And these are a few of the key themes, paraphrased, but kind of what I heard from the developers. Zoning is a barrier to infill development. Just some of the types of projects people want to do, you can't do with the current zoning code. Preparing an infill lot for development can be very expensive. Clearing trees can be $12,000, $18,000. Redoing the utilities to connect to the city services, but there are limited tools to lower those costs. Redevelopment funds are spread too thin, kind of spread, one person said, shotgun approach throughout the city versus kind of targeted areas and aligning resources to kind of push things further. We heard that city leadership talks a lot about infill development, but the actions don't seem to prioritize it. There was some positive. The land bank would be helpful in assembling sites and reducing land acquisition costs that help make the numbers work and stretch resources further. TIF, which is pretty widely and well used here, doesn't work for smaller projects because it's there's a lot of cost to do all the work to get TIF. So some sort of relief to help smaller projects pencil out would be helpful.
So would TIF not work? And we've got a lot of aging infrastructure in this city. We've got a lot of water and sewer that's 80 years old that is going to have to be replaced. And I don't know that the city plan is to start special assessing some of those areas. And I also think about the 100 miles of unpaved streets that we have in the city. If there'd be an opportunity to TIF some of those areas to get people to build them out. So I wouldn't want to just throw the idea out the window.
Right, great comment.
I think what Andy's saying here in this slide is that a small-scale development probably wouldn't generate the increment necessary to support the improvements.
Wouldn't.
Right,
wouldn't
yeah,
be enough
it's
tax
a matter
to
of
pay for it.
scale.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Andy, I just have a quick question, and not exact, but how many developers did you speak with, and did you use kind of a key informant interview process where you asked them all the same questions to get consistent responses? I'm just a little bit curious about the process, because this is a really important part of it for me. I'm just really curious to know what the developers thought, because they're the ones who are going to have to buy into it to do it, right? So if you could just maybe share a little bit more detail about the process of how you got this information. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I spoke with 8 or 10. I don't have the specific number in my mind this morning. I did have a few key questions. I just kind of opened it up to hear about kind of what types of projects they're trying to do, what has worked well, and what would be helpful from kind of thinking about what the city could do to help the process. And that's really what guided the discussions.
Thank you.
Andy, I have one question.
Yes, sir.
And I'm coming in partly in the middle of this process, but how does the land bank get land in the first place?
That's a great question. I could spend quite an amount of time on that one. So in brief, there's a variety of different options. One could be acquisition at property tax sales. Another one could be donations. Other ones could be just straight up acquisitions by approaching property owners and working out an agreeable
I
deal
guess
with
that's
them.
kind of my question. Are there property owners just willing to give their property up? And I'm confused as to where that's happening.
There actually have been circumstances, such as in neighborhoods perhaps where the housing stock isn't as well maintained. Perhaps a family member dies away and a relative in another state inherits it, and they don't have the means to take care of it. They don't want to deal with it, and so they're looking for an easy way out, and it's in bad condition, so it wouldn't normally sell. That could be an opportunity. But there's a variety of different circumstances, and sir, if you like, I'd like to get together with you and provide some more information about the land bank and the zoning overall.
Let's do it. Thank you.
And Scott, while you're there, just to emphasize, I know a question that came up at my district advisory board. The city would not be taking any land from anyone. It would only be if they donated or we acquired, correct? That was a big concern for my district advisory board. So just, I think we can't probably say that enough, because land banks are a new concept in this community. It's new to me, it's new to many folks, so just to reemphasize that.
Yes, I
Thank you.
can't emphasize, excellent point. I can't emphasize enough that the state does not allow land banks the authority to do eminent domain. So this is not urban renewal. Yeah.
I remember that part from your DAB speech. Thank you.
Andy, could you possibly go in a little more detail on we need to allow for more density and less parking to help create vibrant places? Like, I get that. I also know that there's probably been several developers who have heard from places like College Hill Neighborhood Association that would argue differently about less parking. Is there any more to that, or just kind of a thought that was given to you?
It was a thought. It was kind of around, a duplex conversation, or kind of a stacked duplex where you still have to provide whatever the number of car spaces on that same lot, where it doesn't allow, it challenges that type of development. The parking issue is a challenge everywhere, and there's definitely a balance to strike. That was the main thing I heard.
Okay.
Any other thoughts or questions? The next aspect we looked at before getting to the recommendations was understanding the economics of development and why infill development is so challenging, and kind of to start to think about how we can kind of leverage resources more and stretch them further. We do this by looking at what we call the feasibility gap, which simply compares the development cost to market value in different contexts. This is just an example of what would be the emerging neighborhood, where the cost to build a single-family home and make a reasonable profit for a developer is about $170,000. It's kind of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, and the market value might be $120,000. So to make this project possible, you need $50,000 to fill the gap. And we looked at those different neighborhoods and the neighborhood cycles from places for people in kind of the most challenged areas. The gap is about 65,000. In a maturing area or more stable neighborhoods, there really shouldn't be a gap, so you shouldn't need public resources. And it varies in between there. Kind of at the bottom, we're just reiterating that it's a long-term commitment to neighborhood revitalization versus where the market does the most work. And Mennonite Housing and Habitat kind of really confirmed these numbers, particularly in emerging and formative neighborhoods. That's the gap they're seeing. That's where the home funds are going for Mennonite Housing's work, et cetera.
Hey, Andy, I have a question before you move on from here. These categories of formative, emerging, flourishing, and maturing, I went back and looked at the original Places for People plan and kind of studied it a little bit more. And I think one of the things I'm hearing from neighborhoods is who determines those categories. I mean, is there set criteria that says if it's, you know, this kind of makeup, it's formative, it's emerging or flourishing, who gets to determine that?
For that process, I did from a kind of a framework of different neighborhood reinvestment cycles. Moving forward, I would definitely recommend working with the community about what makes sense. But, you know, and what I did was kind of layered different criteria such as household income, poverty rate, property values, levels of investment to kind of see where the different areas fit. The city of Topeka did it a little differently in the neighborhood health map. They tied it to kind of health terms, so it's more familiar. I admit these are a little bit esoteric, a little academic, but you know, Topeka has intensive care at risk and then, you know, healthy. So that moving forward, if this is an approach that is used, you know, I would recommend taking a look and making sure it makes sense.
Yeah, so we could take some time and figure out what criteria we as a community wanted to use to determine that, I think is what I hear you saying.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I developed kind of a prototype mixed use example that you might see at, you know, one of the nodes, one of the corners, with ground level commercial. This example would fit on an acre site, have about 40 apartments as well. Basically, the break-even cost where you wouldn't have the development gap would be about $1.45 a square foot for residential and $24 a square foot for commercial, which is at the high end of what we achieve in all of Wichita. You know, I will say that this type of infill product, which reflects what's recommended in places for people to a certain extent, is also incentivized in like downtown Overland Park or Kansas City area where a lot of this type of development is happening. They still get 15 to 20% funded by TIF. So this is not unusual. Kind of the gap ranges from, you know, formative to maturing. And I think a key point here is that to do quality mixed use, even in our most stable neighborhoods, and probably why we don't see it a lot without incentives, is that there's still a development gap. And you know, unfortunately, with rising construction costs, it is continuing to be a challenge. It's also why we see, in terms of mixed use or multifamily, you know, mainly Class A being built. And I wanted to take this a little bit further because we know there's a gap. I think that's understood here. But how would these different approaches fill that gap? This example, I did a single-family home in a formative neighborhood, so a most challenged area where the market value might be $105,000, so it has a $65,000 gap. A building permit fee waiver would be about $1,500. The property tax abatement, the net present value over 10 years, a 95% abatement would contribute about $12,000. And then after developer's equity, because they need to have their own money in the game, leaves a gap of $37,500, which is still a gap, and we still need funds to help fill the gap, but it would stretch what we have today further, so more homes could be built. It's a similar story for kind of a mixed-use development. At one of the nodes, the property tax abatement would have kind of a greater impact here, but the building permit fee waiver would only be about $22,000 in the greater scheme of things. And so that's kind of what it takes to do this kind of development. And it really informs incentive policy and how we can leverage the resources we have and potential resources that might come to the table as we move forward. Any other questions or comments before I kind of discuss recommendations and or what we think next steps are? So the recommendations to support infill development really fall into kind of these programs, policies, and funds. I'm not going to read everything on the list, but because I do have priority recommendations, but, I think a revitalization program designed somewhat like Topeka's would be really effective here. Policies to make things more straightforward and aligned within the city would help. The last bullet in policies, support Neighborhood Home Investments Act. That is kind of a federal legislation that's proposed that would help, kind of similar to how the low-income housing tax credits work, but for sale, single-family home, to help with that second mortgage, that value gap, could really help in a lot of our neighborhoods. So supporting that could be helpful. And then funds. Is there a new fund or a CDFI or something that would help this work? And so kind of first, when we're thinking about what we do now, I think implementing the land bank and zoning modifications that make sense as you continue these conversations would definitely be helpful. Creating a single web page to align all the information, would also be helpful. Tulsa has a uniform incentive application. It's about 2 or 3 pages, and it starts the conversation where you have the developer's proposal, you have the pro forma, hopefully they have a bank involved already, and you can have the discussion based on that about what incentives will work and what won't, and what needs to be done to move forward. I think adapting the neighborhood cycle map, I think your GIS department could easily adapt what was done for places for people and make it so it's internal and able to be customized with what criteria are needed and updated regularly, and will help focus and tier these different approaches. And then there may be areas for further study to really understand how to target these resources. It could be a housing needs assessment or some other sort of thing that will help make decisions as you move forward. The second thing is reestablish a modified neighborhood revitalization program. We know that begins with coordinating with the other entities that will be impacted through a tax abatement. But really thinking about those key elements, we think that 95% abatement versus 100% is a nice target, because you start to see, you get a little bit of the revenue before things kick in 10 years. What are the tiers? What types of projects and what areas get the most? And then what's reasonable as you work through the different areas, and decide how it'll be administered. I mean, there's a lot of sample ordinances to build from that have these criteria spelled out that you could customize. And the final recommendation is create an affordable housing fund. This is something that the other communities, it's emerging across the country. It's underway. Tulsa just launched theirs, and we're working with them on that. Topeka is working on funding theirs. But this basically helps expand the production of quality affordable housing, which has such a long-term effect on stabilizing communities and our neighbors' lives. These are highly flexible. They don't have all the arduous federal requirements of tax credits or HUD funds. You still want to monitor them and have a vetting process, but they can be grants, revolving loans, or equity products. They're typically seeded with city or public funds, but they're also a resource through partnerships to leverage and pool CRA funds, for instance. So you don't have 30 banks doing 6 deals all over town. You have kind of a central resource with more funds available and philanthropy, et cetera. It relies on partnerships. Nonprofits, for-profits, developers, banks, et cetera. And a $5 million fund would support the development of about 100 to 150 new homes. And this takes into consideration renovation of some homes. Some would be in the most challenged neighborhoods. Some might be in the emerging or what have you neighborhoods. And this has just been a very powerful tool across the country. And so really next steps, and this is my last slide, is you know, how do we move forward from here? This is a lot of information. There's a lot to think about. I think there's a few questions to ask. What is the city trying to achieve? We're here because it's about supporting infill development. We think that starting with housing is key, particularly affordable housing, because it has such a great impact on neighborhoods. Commercial development should also be a focus, but you need to start somewhere. You know, I would ask you, is this an accurate kind of understanding? Secondly, where should the focus be? We think there's a good framework from Places for People and the work that went into that and the input we got from the community. But think through what areas should get the most support. Is it priority nodes, which is what we're working through with the incentives committee? Is it specific neighborhoods? Is it areas with investment underway where you already have kind of CIP or infrastructure projects to leverage and kind of layer other programs? Do some locations in the city need a new approach from what we're doing today? And then how do we implement the programs and policies? Which programs will address these challenges the best? Obviously, we've told you what we think, but there's a lot to work through. We need to know like the scale of the need. We need to know what existing resources there are today. What are potential funding sources? You know, a lot of times a new source comes out of the woodwork when an initiative like an affordable housing fund is launched. What is the return on investment and fiscal impacts? What's the wisdom of doing some of these to the city budget? And then there's going to be some decisions and ordinances, et cetera. But you know, there's a lot of good precedents. People are doing this work today. People just did it. And you know, a key element is that they're flexible and willing to start somewhere, but reevaluate. You know, I mentioned Tulsa launched their Affordable Housing Trust Fund in February. They're already reevaluating the application criteria, the scoring criteria, et cetera, because they want to make sure it works for the community. And with that, ready for any more questions or discussion you might have.
I have another question, and this somewhat this triggered it in terms of recommendations. But thinking back to the slide that had the 10 empty lots. Okay, so one of the things that I've heard from like Habitat is that when you have a grouping of houses like Rock the Block, where you have a group of houses, you make a much bigger impact in a neighborhood than these kind of one-off infill developments. So how do we reconcile, you know, how do we get the most bang for our buck in terms of that? Should we consider that?
Yes, absolutely. I think what is, you know, exciting to think about is how to align work with the community around a couple blocks like that might be fragmented and not next to each other. It is more difficult for a Habitat to do their work in that context. But what if you could align the new developer with kind of home repair programs that help, you know, the neighbors fix up their homes? Well, the land bank to identify properties that are, for lack of a better word, in arrears because you can't find the owner. There's a lien. Those are challenges. So if you can do all those kind of in concert, then it's really set up for broader success, where you can tackle those more, I guess, more difficult areas where there aren't two lots next to each other.
So I like that comment there. If we're looking at a neighborhood and putting money into it and trying to spur new development, I think it's only fair to the neighbors and the neighborhood and the city in a whole that we try to look at some kind of repair incentives for the rest of the neighborhood to change the whole block, change the whole area. Be curious what kind of tools are out there for that.
are you seeing more multifamily units being initiated or single-family homes in some of these other cities?
I'm thinking through. There's really a mix. And the ones we're working in are trying to approach both. There's really an acknowledgement, I think, well, not quite universally, but broadly, that we do need single-family homes to help fill in the gaps in neighborhoods. And maybe the multifamilies more at those key notes, so we don't change the character of a neighborhood. So it's a balance we're seeing. Sometimes we see where we do have strong habitats and Mennonite housings that maybe the single-family homes aren't quite the initial focus, but we really aren't seeing that too much in Omaha or Tulsa or Topeka. They're just trying to get quality housing built generally. I will say the multifamily's tough because the primary funding mechanism is low-income housing tax credits, which has an incredibly competitive application cycle. You may need to submit an application 3 or 4 times to get the funds. So I guess that's led some to shift a little bit to single family and filling in those missing teeth.
Okay. Just asking, that was a concern from a few folks in a few areas in Northeast Wichita. We all know home ownership is what really helps you generationally and build generational wealth, but there were several folks that wanted to build multifamily units, which were essentially apartments. So you weren't really getting that credit help, that equity help or anything. So I'm just looking for the trends with these incentives. But if both are kind of working equally, then that could work out. Personally, there's a few multifamily units that probably shouldn't be in operation right now. And if you're replacing that with new, then it's not really taking over the neighborhood with multifamily units. It's just replacing something that probably shouldn't be open with something that's quality for folks. But
If I could weigh in, because we'll have limited dollars initially, it would be great if the council would want to focus primarily on single-family owner-occupied properties for the exact reason that you talked about in terms of generational wealth building, as well as then having a portion of your funds going to rehab for existing property owners in that block. I think that's a great strategy. I think when we start talking about multifamily, we're really, you're using resources a lot quicker because of the cost of the project, and I don't think you get quite the impact. So I would hope that the council would want to target, at least initially, single family.
I do.
And it seems like that would make sense also in terms of where you talked about the retail projects. Like if the housing stock becomes better, I mean, if people want to live in an area, then the retail follows. So working on single family first would make more sense than some of these other types of incentives we could offer.
Plus, it recognizes the market reality right now, and that is the lack of affordable housing that exists in the community, right? So it's an immediate need that we could make an impact on.
Yeah.
So just completing the census, we should have some good data. Could we maybe break up the numbers by neighborhoods or by areas to see what the current home ownership is? Because if that's the real metric we're going after, I'd like to be able to see annually or quarterly or whatever if we're moving the needle on that.
Yeah, staff could correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's still gonna be a little while before we have the new census data, but I think we can use data that we already have to identify some target neighborhoods.
I think they've already done some training, like they were offering some training on how to get that information, so I thought there was some information out there that we could utilize.
Yeah, I'll defer to staff.
Okay.
So I like the revitalization fund idea. One of the struggles we've had in the Rock the Block area and others is rentership. And so you have landlords or property owners that either are unreachable or maybe even unwilling, or funds are not able to help those landlords that should be invested in their own properties anyway. Do you have any research on how these other cities may have addressed that? Because I even think back to one issue we had in Northeast Wichita where property owners, some of them were out of state, didn't talk to the rental folks. And so if those properties can't get investment from the landlord, then we are building really nice quality homes from there, but this landlord is not invested in their property like they should. And there's really no penalty to them because they still have folks there that are paying them. So just looking at how we can work through that. Because we're struggling with that now. There's 2 funds to help out in the Rock the Block area, but they're not for landlords.
Right. There is no great answer from what we've seen. A lot of places are struggling with it. You know, some areas try code enforcement a little differently and work with municipal court to make sure the fines go through. That doesn't always work, but there's no great program to address the problem landlords unless there's a clear violation of, you know, either tenant rights or the city code, be it nuisances or frequent code violations. I haven't looked at what Wichita's rules are in terms of, escalating if there's continued problems over time. But it's a common challenge. It's a difficult problem for cities to work through. I wish I had a better answer.
Have there been any funds? I know you talked about potentially helping out with property tax, so I'll just give you the situation that I know about. I was door knocking in a neighborhood. Young lady lived in a house that probably had 4 code violations. They could clearly see there was a hole in the back of the house going in and out, so rodents could come in and out of her house. She was paying $750 a month for that house. I let her know about the Habitat program. Oddly, she was just out of the income bracket for that, so she couldn't afford that. And if we would have really had code enforcement come, that landlord might have jacked her rent up even more. And because of her felony background, she wasn't able to go anywhere else really, so she just kind of accepted where she was at. So in that case, if we began to truly look at these code violations, which were there, you know, it wouldn't be a stretch of government, but in that case where these landlords may then just say, we're gonna jack your rent up for someone who's already kind of struggling to stay in this space, is there any funds that you've seen that help them get into better affordable housing?
One of the things we've been looking at is called second chance tenancy, and it might help individuals with eviction or a felony record who kind of go through kind of a program similar to homeowner training, but then you have landlords that work with that provider and help get them into that more stable environment. So that's one way we've seen that's kind of emerging to help with those situations. Another, you know, issue, and it doesn't happen overnight, but we just need more affordable housing that's quality, so that if there are supports to help with that record and get into a quality unit. So it's kind of a longer term, bigger issue, but the second chance tenancy type of program is interesting and showing some promise in places.
I'll look into that. Thank you.
Further discussion?
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'll turn it over to Scott.
Appreciate all the work you do on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a brief update on the land bank and the zoning updates. I just want to let you know that we've presented information to 5 of the DABs. We're following up with the 6th one in April. We've gone to the Transit Advisory Board, a variety of other associations, including the Realtors and the Wichita Area Builders Association. And in April, we're scheduled to present to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board. We've been invited, requested to go to the Sunrise Rotary Club, Uptown Neighborhood, and I'm sure others will add on to that list. In addition, we've received many comments and questions and lots of feedback from the 2 social media town halls. We've addressed most of those questions. We've updated our FAQ on the website, and so we're working on getting information responses out on those. I'd like to, if possible, I'd like to follow up and provide you with a summary of what we received and what we've shared back sometime in April. And that would give us time to finish up with these next round of groups that we've identified, and also to kind of get everything packaged and put together for you. A couple of quick notes in terms of schedule is I'd like to bring the land bank to you sometime around in May. We've gotten pretty good feedback. I think we've been able to address most of the questions that are out there, similar to property acquisitions has been one that's commonly come up. I think we've got those pretty well addressed. I'd like to spend more time on the conversation about zoning. We have a really good conversation going on about zoning right now, and so I think that dialogue could use a little bit more time to continue that conversation. So if we could, I'd like to slow that process down to make sure that we get that robust conversation taken care of. And then you saw the information on the incentives today. So those are the 3 initiatives that we're working on. That's just a very brief update, but we'll have more information for you soon.
Hey, Scott, and I'm really glad you mentioned all that you did and the next steps, and especially the Bike Ped Advisory Board. There was one more slide in my packet, and I was super excited to talk about this one about the walkable design, and we didn't get to. That's okay. But I was thinking when I was looking this over before that we have things like a master bicycle plan, and we have a master pedestrian plan, and we have all sorts of documents that help lead us strategically to where we want to get in our city, and I'm super glad to hear that this is going to tie into those. So thank you very much for taking those steps to ensure we're making sure that we're really utilizing the great work that's already been done by staff and the community members in the past through different initiatives to augment this, and this can be part of those successes as well. So thank you for that.
And I guess I would just highlight that slide shows the financial impact of more walkable development and how it can strengthen our community financially by providing a better return on investment and productivity from properties.
Yeah, there's a statistic that it's over 20% increase in home value if you're able to walk to home, school, to school, your faith work. So, I mean, it's not, I think sometimes people think about walking and biking as just recreation, but it also has a financial impact. So glad to see we're thinking about the whole process and all the different, ways that this can impact our community. So thank you.
And just one more thing, Scott. Just to, I guess, piggyback off the previous comment. Yeah, we see now is the Zillow app will actually include a walkability score, and you can see a correlation on that national application for increase in value when it comes to walking. So we appreciate the work you guys are doing. Did I read something about you not too long ago?
I'm afraid to ask where, maybe.
I think it was in a business journal.
Yes, sir.
What was that?
There was I think it was 10 minutes. I think I tried to turn it into 15, but 10 minutes with the planning director. So
it's a very good write-up, and it's amazing to, it's not surprising because I think our staff does an incredible job, but it's really great to be thumbing through that and see a full-page article about someone like you who's put so much into our city and into work like this. So I just wanted to take a moment to brag about that article. If you haven't read it, it is, I think, in the last Wichita Business Journal, and it was a source of pride for me as mayor of the city to look at and see someone like you be highlighted in such a high esteem as you were. So congratulations for that, and we appreciate everything you do.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to add to that it really reflects the projects and the opportunities that I've been granted. So I thank you very much to the leadership for allowing that, and also for the team and the people that I get to work with and the people I get to work for. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity and the recognition, so thank you.
Of course. Scott, I have one question. I wanted to do it before the accolades, but The Land Bank Board, is it still 7 members, and does it have neighborhood representation?
You know, yes, we've talked about that, and I'm going to defer to Mary on that one because she's got the latest.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mary Hunt, Principal Planner. As far as the Land Bank's Board of Directors, right now there's a list of basically backgrounds that we're looking for because we need to cover all of that, make sure we have a broad spectrum of people that know real estate finance, construction, because they're going to be making some very specific recommendations to the council. As far as the neighborhood, it's certainly possible that someone on that board of 7 could be doing dual duty. It's also possible that they could periodically appoint an ad hoc committee, and the ad hoc committee could be in place for quite some time. That could represent specific either parts of town, meaning multiple neighborhoods, or even just 1 or 2 neighborhoods. And that's really up to the board to decide what's best and what you all think is best. So there's some flexibility with that board right now when you are thinking about who you might prefer to appoint.
Okay, but I know that I would definitely prefer to see neighborhoods represented on the actual board, not just the ad hoc committee, because there's no guarantee that I actually get created. And that voice doesn't always have to get listened to. And if there's a member of the board who is a neighborhood representative, either north or south of Kellogg, because we have 2 districts in the core, and that most of the NRA, or Neighborhood Revitalization Program area, both north and south of Kellogg. But I always hear from them about these projects, even if it's something great like affordable housing. And if they don't have a voice at the actual table, not the chair in the back, that could be a concern. And I don't think it would be a hindrance, but I know the last time I brought that up, I kind of said that, but I also had a lot of folks in the neighborhood saying yes, they wanted to be at that table too. So just to always have that perspective as these conversations are going on.
Well, I will let you know that tomorrow morning at 9, we've got a small subset of the land bank group meeting, and we really are just polishing some of the outstanding questions that we have, and I'm going to add that to the list as we discuss that. So
thank you.
You bet.
Further discussion?
Scott, I have a couple more questions on the, back on the incentives. You talked about land bank and zoning, where we were on those. What's the plan going forward with the incentives? Are we going to take it out to the DABs, or what's that process now?
Yeah, well, I think it was a little bit fluid because we wanted to see how the conversation went today. So if we could have a little bit more time to strategize with Andy, wanted to make sure that that was the direction you were comfortable with.
Okay, and then on the recommendation of the $5 million fund to support the development of, new homes, how would we staff that? Would that be part of the $5 million?
I guess I would look to Andy to see what he's seen in other communities, kind of what he was alluding to.
Thanks.
I can speak to, Tulsa is staffing it through, and they did hire there's a housing coordinator, and she works through the economic development department to administer the program. And they have support through, legal and other entities that already do kind of development agreements and are set up to track kind of the impact on neighborhoods and so forth. But it usually is a staff position to help get the word out and administer the fund and all of that. And I don't know specifically if that's out of their affordable housing fund. I think it's just part of the general operations.
But they staff it out of economic development, basically?
Just at this point, I would anticipate it would come out of that funding. We're going to discuss this more with you during the workshop on April 8th. I think this is something that we ought to do sooner than later if we can identify the resources. And I think a designated person who is not only able to handle the financial end of this, but also the relationship with developers and builders is going to be important. So I think that position, it may be difficult. I mean, as stretched as we are with other operations and economic development and housing, it may be most important to take a piece of that funding and use it for a full-time staff person. If the council wants to focus on that affordable housing piece.
Thanks.
As we look at possible property tax abatements, what portion is the city property tax bill and what portion is the county and the school district? And have we got an idea as to how we could go into the conversation as getting to the county and the school boards on board with this?
I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get them there, and you're talking about an NRA. We've done some initial work on boundaries for NRA, but I'm not comfortable yet that that it's data-driven enough for council's review, and so we're putting some things together similar to what Andy talked about in terms of different demographics, with the housing stock, income levels, because I think the more we target these resources, the better, especially in the early phases, the better the results. I think NRA may take a little longer than maybe even creating this fund, but we have to have something approved by you, even if it's only on city resources initially. I'd like to get the county and the school district on board, but everybody's still so concerned about their financial condition coming out of COVID that I think we need a plan B that has just our resources involved. And it may be that it isn't NRA, it may be fee rate waivers that we first look at and then bring our partners on in NRA in another phase.
Further discussion? Well, Mr. Manager, the floor is yours in case you want to close it out.
Hopefully you found this as exciting as we have as staff.
There's no objection, then I guess we will end the meeting. Thank you all.